Hello, I'm Charles and I am back from vacation. I'm the host for Charles Weekly Party, and before we get started, let's roll the intro. Alright, so I could hear a little bit of echo in the room that I'm in, so I do apologize if that ends up coming through on your end, but this is the spot I have to record for today, so I'm going to have to make the best out of it. Now, with regard to my vacation, I did announce that I'd be taking 2 weeks off, and subsequently for the first day of release that I had taken off, I managed to sustain a slight injury that, no matter what, would have kept me from releasing an episode. And still in the aftermath of that injury, but thankfully the announced vacation coincided with that, and I feel like I am now at a point where I can function well enough to actually edit the thing. Regardless, vacation has expired, and if I had actually been releasing episodes in the meantime, I certainly would have. But once again, messing up my hand didn't exactly do me a heck of a lot of good. But here we are, and the important things to talk about today involve a public library and a decision, an announcement by Apple that ended up causing a lot of controversy. So today I'm here to talk about Norwell Public Library. Now, for those of you who have been listening for all of the episodes, you'll recall that this isn't the first time I'm bringing up a library. In fact, coming straight to mind are two other episodes that I did, one on Pierre-Vive and the other on the Edmonton Public Library. Today's library falls a little bit closer to the type of library that Edmonton was, with a public library. And the big things I've mentioned in the past are that nowadays libraries can't just be a whole ton of books, because that's not where the cultural shift is happening. Just having stacks of books doesn't do a lot of good. Sometimes someone wants to read them, and having a comfortable spot to read them makes a difference. Also, a library, since it's a public place, is a really good place for gatherings of various different types. So a modern day library needs to be able to sustain that. So, and last but not least, actually, two more things. Multimedia needs to be integrated into modern library designs. Because if you think about it, not everything we're working with nowadays is all books. A lot of times we're working with online resources as well. And most of the time for news articles, rather than relying on citing a newspaper, most people will go and work with an online news source. Now, don't get me wrong, I still have a lot of appreciation for newspapers, but the whole part of a library is to convey knowledge and to store knowledge. And since knowledge is now no longer stored just in books, knowledge, the purpose of libraries has shifted from just holding books to holding other gateways to knowledge. And lastly, convenience is a must. If you think about it, libraries aren't going to be as popular as your local shopping mall. And in modern day and age, when a lot of shopping malls are having declines in the number of people visiting there, that's saying something. But libraries still remain important, but their focus needs to shift so that they can stay relevant. So, for the Norwell Public Library, all of these had to be taken into account to make one nice, beautiful library. And beautiful it is. So the Norwell Public Library was designed by Adams Ello Architecture. I'm probably mispronouncing the name badly, but it is located in Norwell, Massachusetts, which is a little bit on the eastern portion of the state. So not too far inland, but it's not on the it's not on the shore. So the site that this is on is a little bit more inland. Well, not a lot far inland, but it has an inland feel because it is a wetland in essence, and it has bountiful vegetation, and both standard sort of ground vegetation or native ground vegetation, as well as plentiful trees around. So if you didn't know any better, you could be in the middle of you could be surrounded by forest. You wouldn't know that you are as close to the ocean as you are. And the important thing about a wetland is that it makes building anything a lot more complicated. If you think about it, building any building isn't the easiest thing in the world. And that's when you have a little bit more of a structural supporting soil. But when you have a more fluid level of soil, that can pose other issues. So, not to mention that wetlands are almost always a lot more protected and bring in a lot more I'm trying to figure out the best way to put it. It really adds a few steps to getting the building approved to be built. And for good reason. Because the wetlands are usually home to a lot of things that can't live in drier conditions. So that's basically why it's always protected. There are a number of reasons that aren't coming to my mind right now, but I've had it's been an interesting day, so I'm sure you can probably figure out a whole bunch of reasons why it's not really why it's a lot more complicated to build in wetlands. But I digress. The building itself has 3 wings. Has a wing targeted towards adults, has a wing targeted towards children, and it has a wing targeted towards community. All connected by a central little area. So if you were to envision the building, it's It's U-shaped with a decent focus on a courtyard. Now, in order to bring everything together on this building, there are, in some areas, floor-to-ceiling windows, because if you have a great view, why waste it? I mean, if you have, imagine having a beautiful painting on your wall. The moment you go and you can look at it all you want, right? It's beautiful. Now, imagine you put, let's just say, imagine you put something to cover the top half of it. Or, not the top half, but let's say you cover the top quarter of the painting. And for kicks and giggles, you cover over the bottom portion of the painting too. So you're left with the half that remains in the middle. All that really does is focus, it gives you a little bit of attention on that, but you can tell that you're not getting the full experience because the other pieces are covered. And that's the same thing here. Floor-to-ceiling windows grant that full view of the painting. Anything else is covering over bits and pieces. And all I can say is it leaves someone to wonder, what would it look like if it had been a floor-to-ceiling window? The other important thing about floor-to-ceiling windows is that it is beautiful, but it does come with a cost. It's a lot more difficult to insulate glass. Sure, we're getting better at it, but it's not as good as, you can't insulate glass right now as well as you can insulate your standard wall, or at least you can't do it as inexpensively. And good insulation isn't cheap to put in a wall. So the other piece of floor-to-ceiling windows is that you do need to have a good view on the other side. It's a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a brick wall is the last thing you're going to want to see. But a floor-to-ceiling window that grants you a beautiful picture of natural vegetation for as far as the eye will let you see, that is a good use of a floor-to-ceiling window. I like using a painting as an analogy for this, because the if you have a painting that's worth looking at, you're going to want to look at the whole thing. But if your painting isn't worth looking at, then you're not going to want to see it there. Or if it's something you really don't like to see, then you're going to want to cover it up. Or if it does get covered up, you're not going to be worried about it at all. So, may seem like a little minor thing, but it's one of the things that personally I feel is the greatest connection between the inside and the outside of a building, is that one element. Sure, you have little obstructions in the form of mullions that make it so that you maybe have some lines over the beautiful view, but it's still panoramic nonetheless. And if you move around, you can see what those mullions are blocking. It's not like you're painting stripes over the painting. It's more like you're putting, holding up little pieces to block it from 5 feet away. And I can't think of the number of times that growing up, some of my favorite classrooms, or the ones I was more likely to enjoy the view from the window were the ones where it was facing, where the times I was in the classroom that had windows facing a green space. Windows facing either a playground or a parking lot was just plain distracting. But getting to see nature, that was one of my favorite classrooms growing up. There were other places that I've been in where there are windows, nothing good sticking out of them. You can look out of them, but in some of those cases, there's no reason to. There's nothing really to see worth looking at. And that brings me to more points. One of the greatest uses, or the way the whole library is arranged, is designed to make maximum use of these floor to ceiling windows. So looking at it, there are plentiful reading areas. But if you take a look at the floor plans, a lot of the seating is right next to the windows. So you're right there. You have basically you only have whatever's happening in the plants to distract you. And since plants aren't usually very distracting, I think that's got to provide that experience that I enjoyed so much growing up. If you glance out the window, it's nice, beautiful, and relaxing. So if you decide to give your eyes a quick break from reading the book, you have something worthwhile to look at for that short break. And putting the books in the center of the room puts a little bit of a focus on that too. So you can see the reading spots, and you're looking for, imagine just perusing the book stacks. You're looking for a book, and you glance to see the beautiful view out the window, and that just inspires you to find a book that maybe you find a book that you've already read and you really look forward to reading again, or maybe you find something that looks interesting that you want to try reading. Either way, just that floor to ceiling window makes you want to sit down and read. No other way to put it. And the other thing that sort of subtly guides people to looking at that, or going towards that direction. Another feature that really goes and drags your attention to the outdoors and the nice seating area that you have with it is the fact that there's a sloped roof. Sure, it's subtle, but having the roof a little bit higher towards the end makes it seem like the building is opening up to the outdoors. And it also strategically grants more of a view. It's basically taking a little bit more of the covering off of the painting. So you're not covering quite as much on the top half. So, believe it or not, these little subtle things actually do make a slight difference in your head as to how you perceive a building. You may not think about it, but these small little features do actually do that. So a couple of other amenities is that to really solidify the connection between the library and the outdoors, you have something I haven't seen before in a library, which is reading porches. Think about it. You can take a book outside to read without ever having to check it out. I don't know about you, but for me, this just totally blows my mind. Taking a book outside without taking a book outside. You're within the library, but you're outside enjoying everything that nature has. Boundless view of all the beautiful vegetation. You have chairs to sit down on and read. You can smell whatever the smell is outside of the library, and if it's undesirable, you can always go right back inside and just enjoy the panoramic view. And you can enjoy the natural breeze that would come from sitting outside. And of course, for the library's sake, it's covered. If the rain decides to make a sudden appearance, they don't have to worry about their books being damaged. And if it starts getting windy and raining, well, most people know to tuck inside at that point. Another thing, going back to the sort of community focus, is the program room. So having a spot where you can have a larger community gathering is always useful. Maybe you want to hold a weekend seminar. You could go to the library and utilize the space. Obviously, most libraries do have a system for renting these out, but either way, it's still there for the community to be able to use. And you can have, and that's events both planned by the library and other events that people bring to the library. Either way, still pretty beautiful. And last but not least, there are a variety of reading and study rooms. Now, if you think about one of the primary use groups of a library, it's going to be students. Students are one of the biggest groups of library users. And sometimes you need a quiet place to study, a place where you can just put your head into the game and sit down, focus on what you need to focus on. Having a quiet room to be able to do that and having a multitude of those rooms is useful. Because if you have 2 rooms, well, think about it, all you need is for 2 people to show up that need that particular type of space, and you're out of rooms. So this is where having small rooms that seat 4 people can be useful. So that way you can take care, or you can handle a small study group, but if one person wants to sit down and put pencil to paper hard, they can do it without depriving a lot of other people of that same ability. Now, considering that this building was just completed this year, it does have a reasonable focus on efficiency and has high efficiency HVAC system with, if I'm remembering correctly, all electric components. And what do you got? I think it fell into the category of very high efficiency, something along those lines. But either way, designed to use a minimal amount of energy. All the water fixtures are low flow, which in essence means they just use enough water they use no more water than necessary to do the job. And personally, I think this is a very important thing, because there are toilets from the old days that used gallons upon gallons to do the job that you can realistically do with significantly less water. I mean, if you use something that just halves the water, that's a lot of water saved, and minimizing the whole premise of functioning a little bit more green, so to speak, is the standard 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And there's a reason they're in that order. Step 1 is to reduce. So reducing the amount of water, very important, and in a lot of circumstances, it's a very, very useful thing to do sooner rather than later. So just retrofitting something, maybe you have one of those old, an old toilet that goes and uses 2 gallons of water to flush, or more than 2 gallons of water to flush. I have seen ones that use a substantial amount of water. Why not? Sure, it's a little bit of work, but you'll see the difference in your water bill. Last but not least, there are lighting sensors, which can mess with people, I guess. I've been in buildings that have light sensors. Depending on how they're implemented, sometimes people get a little bit startled to see, oh, a whole bunch of lights just went out. Although I think these are supposed to be a little bit more subtle with dimming. So the way it works is basically the amount of daylight that's in the room gets analyzed, and if there is a substantial amount of daylight, it reduces the amount of artificial light being used. I mean, in an ideal circumstance, you want to use exactly the amount of energy that you need. No more, no less. If you don't need to have a light on all the way, then don't put it on all the way. If there's enough daylight that you don't need it on at all, even better. Saves the amount of electricity you're using. There are multiple benefits for that. One of my favorite things to talk about any building is always the materiality. So having the Vermont slate shingles as a primary exterior material is pretty nice. And I will also add that the materials chosen all are all designed to be more on the renewable side. There's also plentiful glass, and definitely can't shy away from the fact that there's some really pretty cedar cladding. So, in finishing on this, I think it's a really nice modern take of the library, of the modern concept of a library. serves its function well. Obviously, it doesn't need to be as big for the population serving as something like the Edmonton Public Library, but it's still able to give people a reason to go to the library. I mean, for me, step one, if you have a really good looking building, I've noticed, at least in my case, and I'm sure this applies to quite a few other people, I'll try and make excuses to go into a building that looks really great. I'll be trying to figure out, what can I do to get there? And I know for parents, if their kid says, hey, I want to go to the library, if you can get it there, if they want to go to the library on their own, that's great. And I know if growing up I had had a library that looked this beautiful, I absolutely would have been requesting to go there more often. And I bring this up because there are a lot of people seem to think that maybe a library isn't as necessary as it used to be. But I think as long as the library is adaptive, it's still very useful. I don't think I can figure out. I'll take that back. I think it's a fair bet that most people have at some point in time, or I'll speak more for the United States in particular, because I know there is an international audience. I know in the United States, most people have been to a library at least once. And you could ask someone, find out what they did and didn't like about their library. I can say right now, if you have a nice, attractive-looking library, you're gonna get more people that want to sit down there and read. Looking at the Norwell Public Library, the chairs looked more comfortable than the ones I was used to growing up with. The view was better. Actually, where I was, there wasn't really any bit of a view. So I think it just goes to show how you could put the same books inside of two different libraries, but if you had the exact same selection in the Norwell Public Library and the library that I grew up with, I'll choose the Norwell one because it's just that much nicer. Now, I think I've spent quite enough time talking about the library. I could probably fill up a library with everything I just said. But I do want to switch topics to something else that's been quite prominent recently. The Apple privacy debate. Honestly, I never thought I'd be saying these words, but here I am. So part of there is some confusion, but there's a lot of criticism and frustration regarding some of the decisions Apple has made, and for good reason. But before I get into that, I need to explain the 3 different features that they announced, because Apple may have announced them at the same time, but they are by no means the all one feature, and they're not all equally disliked. The first feature is child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, detection. So what this feature does is it takes an image that's going to be uploaded to iCloud Photos and creates a neural hash from it. So it basically takes up the ones and zeros that make that image, and turns it into a hash, which is basically a whole long string of characters that represent that picture without actually being that picture. I could put an image hash in the description, and no one would really be able to figure out what exactly that was. When it creates that hash, it's able to compare it against a securely stored known CSAM database. So this all happens on device. That database of hashes, not images, only the hashes of the images, are stored securely in what Apple dubbed an unreadable format. What it does is it takes the neural hash from the image that is going to be uploaded to iCloud Photos, and it compares it to the hashes of the securely stored hashes of known CSAM. And if the hash matches, then a safety voucher is created to be uploaded with the photo. And what ends up happening is if 30 of these vouchers are sent up to iCloud Photos, then a warning will get triggered and sent to, and basically Apple will be notified to manually review an account. And when I say review an account, review only the images that were flagged as being known CSAM. And if that actually is the case, then the user's account will be disabled and they'll get reported to the appropriate authorities. And the big thing about this is that this feature only applies to photos being uploaded to iCloud Photos. So if iCloud Photos is off, this feature is not going to end up running on your device. Now, that was feature 1. Feature 2 is communication safety for children, which uses artificial intelligence to analyze images for nudity. So if a child goes to send or receive an image that gets analyzed as being or as containing nudity and defined as Apple defined it in the little pop-up that a child would see, it's basically analyzing images for anything that would be covered up by a bathing suit, in their words. And it pops up a warning screen to a child if they go to view it, because it will come in the messages feed blurred or otherwise obscured. So, child goes to see it, they'll get a first warning of, hey, here's why this is sensitive. Someone may not have wanted this to be sent or received, and it may be harmful to you or to others to view this photo. And gives two options, and the one that's in the nice bright blue box is don't view the photo, and the other one in text beneath it as the secondary option, so to speak, is view photo anyway. After that, a second screen pops up. So if a child is 12 years or younger, then it will say, hey, your parent will be, if you choose to view this photo, you get to view it, but your parents will be notified. Or if you choose to send the photo, your parents will be notified. And it's perfectly okay to not view or send this photo. And if you need help, then tap here. So providing the reassurance and resources if necessary. So the notification only applies to children under 13, and children above that age would be able to see the two warning screens and then otherwise be able to view or send the photo without any other notifications. So don't worry, that you don't have to worry about this happening on adult phones, because Apple more or less realized that some people do send slightly more graphic images. That was the second feature. The third feature is Siri. So Siri will basically provide guidance for queries regarding child exploitation or CSAM. And for anyone who does make one of those queries, it provides anonymous resources for use if need be. Now, that's the third feature. So Apple announced all three of these at once, and frankly, the thing with Siri, no problem. The child communication safety, some people had mixed feelings about it until Apple more or less reassured that that's a feature that has to be enabled by, or I believe has to be enabled by parents, especially with the notification you need to, a parent needs to turn that on. It won't just automatically show up. So that one received a little bit of mixed feelings because of having an AI analyze the images. But for child safety, I think most people have decided that's a reasonable thing to do. And it's at the parent's discretion. And most people would agree that having having AI go and analyze a child would be much happier to have an AI go and quickly poke through a photo than to have their parents look at each and every photo. But that first feature is the one that's drawn up a lot of debate and a lot of criticism. And rightly so. I'm going to go into my opinions on the matter now, and there are a lot of people, both privacy advocates, privacy foundations, a lot of people have mentioned their support or lack of support for this first feature. So, when I was mentioning it, probably drew criticism from some of you listening. And my opinion on it is that it's a risky thing to do. Sure, it's trying to combat CSAM being uploaded to iCloud Photos, and it is nothing other than that. But but the big debate is Apple scanning their photos. Now, to provide a little bit of context, if you upload photos to basically any other service, they run these scans. Every time you post a photo on Facebook or Instagram, because I know Facebook has these filters in, Google has filters in, so if you're uploading something to Google Drive, they'll be analyzing it against known CSAM. Same with Microsoft. Apple's wanted to do something for quite a long time about it, according to their executives. And this is the step that they finally came up with to maximize privacy so that your images were as much your images as possible, and to try and keep CSAM material off of their servers. Which reasonably, any reasonable person could see that they have a good reason for wanting. Because no one wants illegal material stored on their servers. And the big question is what Apple's doing reasonable or not? And that's the cause of all of the debate. Because what ends up happening is, and a lot of people have brought up the comments of, what if you take a picture of your kid in a bathtub? Would that flag the filter? Or what if you have other intimate photos on your device that get analyzed? And the big thing for people is not wanting their images to be analyzed. And personally, I can see what they're doing, but at the same time, I do think it's, in essence, creating a back door. Don't get me wrong. Coming up with a solution to not have illegal material on servers, 100% understandable. But the big problem that a lot of people have is that there's the big what if question. Because the big concern is that if someone were to put another image hash in to the database that Apple is using to try and detect CSAM, how could that be used? Apple has said that they do not want to go and they would refuse orders to do such. But there are governments in other countries in the world that do place a lot of restrictions on their citizens, and Apple has even gone and bent into some of their demands because, and I'll use China as an example here, they've built a separate data center in China, and if I remember correctly, they've even removed the Taiwanese flag from the emoji library, following requests from the government. And the big question is, yes, this technology is being released only for use in the United States, but could it be misused? I watched an interview with Craig Federighi, and he said the whole point of doing this is so that you don't have to trust any one person. They said they're opening it up to audits to be able to make sure that it is only searching for CSAM. But the problem is, in my opinion, that yes, they've created a tool so that it's only working with things on iCloud Photos, but how could it be misused? And even if Apple says that they're going to refuse it, that's the big thing. Apple said they'd refuse such demands. That means they have a choice in the matter. That means the tool could technically be used for purposes in which it's not intended to be. And that's the big concern. So, I can't say I'm against trying to find a way of making sure that CSAM doesn't end up on Apple's servers. But the tool they built to do it with, yes, it's a pretty complex solution, but I do think that there are quite a few risks that come with it, and right now the leadership team may have one opinion, but if you have to remember, if you build a tool to do something, it's very, very difficult to destroy such a tool afterwards. Once you create a back door, someone can try and break through it. So that's where I stand on it, and I'll let anyone make their own decisions, because each person has their own line in the sand of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable with regards to personal information and privacy. So for me, this just ends up trying to cross that line. But anyway, I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know the library was one of my favorite things to talk about today, and definitely a nice, beautiful, strong start back from vacation, which ended up being much needed. And yeah, the whole Apple privacy debate may not have been a happy note to finish on, but I feel like it's important for everyone to be educated on the facts of the situation, because there are a lot of people combining things into things that they weren't meant to be. So it's all a matter of being cautious with the tools you create, and remember, and my partie for the week is, remember that anything you create for a noble purpose can be misused. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And you can go to anchor.fm/CharlesWeeklyParty, where you can listen to all previous episodes of Charles Weekly Party. You can interact with the podcast by leaving a voice message, and if you choose, you can support the podcast. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave a review, and if you want, you can always see the action on YouTube. So, I hope you enjoyed. Take care, and roll the outro.